Oh, kia ora koutou, whānau. Welcome to Big Hairy News, BHN, with myself and Chewy. Chewy, good evening to you, sir.
How you doing, friendo?
I'm doing all right, mate. Except I'm a bit concerned. There is a conversation going around Dunedin at the moment, and I think it's probably a conversation that has gone other parts of the world over various ages about how dangerous a particular separated spectrum of light can be when laid down flat on a road for people to walk over. Of course, talking of the Rainbow Road crossing.
I mean, I saw one argument on Facebook that if we use bright colours on an intersection, children will think it's a playground.
Well, do you know
And
what?
we've
Okay.
just had, so literally straight out of the gates, why won't someone think of the children?
And get off the lawn all at the same time.
Pretty much.
I do wonder though. Here's something that someone did mention, and I have actually tried to get a hold of some people in the AA to find out. Legally and technically speaking, does a pedestrian crossing need to be black and white? Like in the road code, it does talk about a zebra crossing. Does it need to be black and white? And I only ask that because if, for example, a driver wasn't paying it, obviously no driver is going to just drive through. That's ridiculous for a rainbow crossing. But if for a driver was distracted and accidentally hit someone on a rainbow crossing, would that therefore not legally be a crossing? Therefore, the pedestrian should have technically stopped. I'm not saying this to speak out against the rainbow crossings. I love the idea. I think it's going to be amazing. But someone mentioned that today on one of the online forums, and I thought, like some wealthy Mercedes owner businessman accidentally hit someone on a rainbow crossing, in 3 years from now, is this going to be their defense? It just made me wonder. That's all.
Well, I think if you look at the barn dance crossings on George Street now, there's actually very minimal markings for those anyway. There's just the lines, and then there's the diagonal starting lines. So especially if they put this, like they're suggesting, on one of those four-way intersections that are controlled with lights anyway, I don't think it matters.
Yeah.
I certainly haven't seen anything legally saying that it has to be a certain format. I think if it was a zebra crossing outside a school or something, yeah. But for the design that Woof seem to be promoting, and compared to what other cities have done, I don't see it being an issue. I really don't.
I wasn't. I was just an interesting thought, a little diversion there for a second. Now, speaking of Woof, people are going to be wondering from outside Dunedin what we're talking about. This conversation is interesting because it seems to be so divisive to some. Like for some people, this is a terrible, worst idea in the world. Maybe that's 20% of the community. For the other 70, 80%, it's either like this is cool or whatever, I don't care. So it seems to be, that's just from my experience of watching what's happening online. And it also seems to be something that shouldn't be such a big deal when it comes to applying to do something like this, like to get a crossing painted in rainbow colors. But there is a bar in Dunedin called Woof. Your favorite bar, is it right?
It's actually my favorite Dunedin bar. It reminds me a lot of the bar scene up in Wellington.
And they have been, should we say, championing?
Yep. They were pushing the petition to have this done really, really hard.
And they've got themselves 6,500 signatures, and they've put this petition before council. And it seems that in principle, the council has said, yes, let's find a place somewhere in Dunedin to do a rainbow crossing. Now, they wanted it in a particular area, which I think is located quite close to where Woof is.
Yes.
And the council said no to that area, but they said yes in principle to doing this. Yeah.
They like the idea, but not the location. Just because of it's on a bus route, and I think wear and tear on it, basically.
Yeah, because there has been some rumors going around about this thing going to cost $40,000, and I know that from what you and I have both looked at, we don't seem to be able to find actual costings for it, which is probably too soon. Because if you don't know where it's going to be, you don't know how big it's going to be. Of course, you know how much it's going to cost. And I think there is, as ratepayers, right? And I'm a Gen X, so don't say okay, boomer, when I say that. But as ratepayers, I mean, that is at least a question or a conversation to be had, which is what is it going to cost and how's that money going to be spent? Although in saying something, I mean, you talked about, we have these things in Dunedin where they painted red or colored dots on our roads, like as a kind of art installation signifying 2 meter distancing. And That cost $40,000, and one particular ratepayer has been banging that about for the past year, saying how terrible it was for
the
council.
council wasted $40,000.
You know more about
$40,000.
you know more about that. You tell us about that.
So the funding actually came from the NZTA. So it wasn't local ratepayers. They had a fund available for local council to access, and the Dunedin City Council made an application and it was approved. And I think whether there's an argument of whether it was effective, and I don't think it was particularly effective, but it was worth a shot. At the time that they did it, the idea was to slow traffic down on George Street, to let people cross the road more easily, to maintain social distancing. That was a fair thesis to run on.
Yep.
And for the and NZTA agreed, and then it happened.
And I actually quite
then they saved money by not removing them.
Yeah, and then the cars just remove them slowly as they drive over them, bit by bit. Yep. But actually, it's your there is a sector of every city around there, the ones that typically phone talkback radio, who just everything's a problem, everything's bad. I saw comments from someone recently about changing the names of cities. How dare they think about Dunedin as Otipoti, and how dare we use that, because that'll eradicate my culture and my history. And you kind of go, is this an Onion headline? Are you aware that this was called something else before it was called Dunedin, and that history and culture was eradicated? So are you actually aware what you're saying out loud? So it's that group of people that seem to complain about everything.
My favorite thing about the eradication of history, or acknowledging the actual Māori names for the places in New Zealand, generally the second place holder doesn't get to name things.
Right.
That's what it is. Oh, I was here second, I'm going to name this one. Yeah. Doesn't gel with me. I think Otipoti is a better name, but it's not going to wipe out Dunedin.
I think the
People
reality
are still going to call it Dunedin.
I think the reality is we already do it. I mean, I don't know if you do it, but I do it. I mean, sometimes I write a Facebook post or do an Instagram tag and I tag it Dunedin, and sometimes I tag it Otipoti. It just kind of depends how it's feeling in the moment. There's no rhyme nor reason. And I actually think that's sort of the cultures coming together. The bicultural agreement is we're developing our own language, which is in part Māori, and I don't speak Māori, but using Māori words, and in part English. I think that's actually, it's almost, to me, feels like a bit of a non-conversation, because no one's ever going to change the name of Auckland to Tamaki Makaurau permanently, but it'll get used more and more and more and more, and there'll be a natural progression.
Absolutely. And I think this boils down to exactly what we're talking about, weirdly, about this crossing, is that there is a segment of the population that is afraid of change. They are afraid of things that they can't understand, whether that's what the queer community has put up with. Suddenly they were never aware of gay people, and now they've got parades, mate. They've got I don't understand it. It's scary, and I don't care for it. So I'm going to hammer out a Facebook post, and I'm going to tell my mate Lee Vandervis, because he's just saying what we're all thinking.
Well, I mean, the other thing is, when you talk about them not really knowing, I saw a post. I did a podcast the other day with a guy called Chris Hoodiwai, who's made a documentary called Milked about the dairy industry in New Zealand. Yep. And I noticed on Sean Plunkett's Facebook page, Chris was on the project last night, and on Sean Plunkett's Facebook page, it had the link to the project story, and then every comment underneath it was like about how this anti-dairying and this, that, and other. And I just went in there and went, have you seen it? Because I've seen it. So how about you go and see it? How about you go and see it first, and then come back?
Change my mind. And then I can't have milkshakes. There's
some shocking things in there, and not to be too much of a spoiler, I can't remember the exact number, but Fonterra has more, whatever the correct term for carbon emissions or greenhouse gases or whichever one it is, Fonterra itself, then more than Sweden.
Yeah,
it's like this, and I was like, holy crap! And there's the water level in some parts of the country, the nitrogen in the water table in some parts of the country is irreversible to do other kinds of crops and irrigation and stuff there. It's irreversible. It's gone beyond. So, go see the documentary first, get some information first, find out more about I'm pointing over there because I'm going to bring something up on the screen. Find out more about the Rainbow Crossing first, and then offer some thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, the argument there is, or the lesson there is, actually talk to people. Like, don't think that if you're, how hard is it to change your position based on new information?
Yeah.
I think this goes into this whole culture war thing that we are having to deal with more and more these days, is people with entrenched positions feel challenged, feel threatened, and it provokes a reaction. And yeah, if we can all get past that, well, then we can all transition into the next phase of our civilization, which I believe should be luxury space communism.
Luxury space communism.
Fully automated luxury
Okay.
space communism. But we're not there yet. We're still arguing about crossings.
I was going to say that this generation that you're talking about and the people that I'm talking about, typically you move away from them through attrition. But actually, I don't know if that's necessarily true, because, there's that old saying that if you're not liberal when you're young, you've got no heart. And if you're not conservative when you're old, you've got no brain. You've heard that saying?
Yeah.
Well, I actually think there's some truth in that, but it's not that you become conservative. What it is over the whole generation, the generations that come after you are more liberal. So you might be liberal like as a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old. But if you're liberal as a 50-year-old, the 30-year-olds are like off the chains. And then if you're liberal as a 30-year-old, the 15-year-olds who are coming up are, so much further left. They look at you, like a 15-year-old looks at a 40-year-old, like liberal activist, and goes, okay, boomer, okay, you're conservative pile of crap. So I think the truth in that saying is not that you become conservative when you're old. It's the other way around, is that the younger generations become more progressive and become more left. I think that's what it is.
I have something to admit here. When I was 18, I thought libertarianism sounded really good.
But you know what? Every political every political position at its purest has validity. But the problem is we are human beings and we fuck it up. So we human beings get in. It's like capitalism, the best entity should win, because the most people are going to buy it. That's going to be the one that's most successful. And then things like the stock market, or things like government, or things like lobbyists or big business, they put their thumb on the scale, and they don't allow the best one to be the winner. They allow the one that's produced in the worst possible way, but it's cheapest to be the winner. You know what I mean? So it's not actually pure capitalism. Pure capitalism would probably work. Pure socialism would probably work. But, a socialist state typically has a despot at the top of it, and then human beings get involved. So they all kind of are corrupt, because we as human beings, I believe, are kind of naturally corrupt. So sorry to be a bit of a downer, Debbie Downer, but that's just kind of how it is. Hey, but let's just have a look at this, because one thing that's interesting in this debate that's come out is I'm assuming it's purely by chance, but purely by chance, Dunedin Airport, and it seems just to be the last 24 hours. What date is this thing? Yeah, this is today, 5th of November. Recording this Friday. Just went and did a rainbow crossing anyway. So we've got one group who are these guys, Wolf, and obviously it's more than just Wolf, but they're doing kind of a campaign to try and get this crossing done. And then they've got it on their page. Dunedin Airport just comes out and does it, which is kind of cool. So maybe because Dunedin Airport's, I'm assuming it's privately owned, it's a business, it does what it wants when it wants, and they've done it. Whereas for a major arterial, we have to go through council and do various things in various ways, and it's been approved, but it's sort of on the way. Let's just have a look, because I'm interested in thoughts around a couple of things, right? First of all, I'm assuming much like yourself there, Chewy, I think the idea of a rainbow crossing is amazing. I look at that picture there and I think I can't wait to walk over it. It looks like a whole lot of fun. It brightens up the environment. It gives support to a group who say they need the support. So I'm fully in support of that.
I'm 100% for anything that makes Dunedin more progressive, vibrant, reflects the community that live here. Whatever that may be.
Yeah.
And if it's traditionally a marginalized group of our community, then so much the better. I just think it's more than just sitting there and going, I don't see the harm in it. I am 100% for it.
Oh, there's no harm in it. I mean, when you say I don't see the harm, I mean there's none. It's nothing but positive, right? The actual crossing itself. I am a big believer though that we as I was gonna say we as activists, it's the wrong word, but we who have got a position to sell don't need the bullshit. We don't need to feather our good arguments with crap to get there. I've had so many interactions with people who have a cause. I noticed, and if people want to look on my Twitter feed, they can. Not that people have to support this group, but that group Family First. They came out today or yesterday, I think, and they put a post on their Facebook page that was quoting Vladimir Putin. And it's like,
nice. He's a good guy.
And I put a comment on their page, something like, I'm looking forward to the inspirational quote from Pol Pot tomorrow, just to even out the week sort of thing. But it's like, we don't need, if we've got a position, and I'm not saying they're my position, but if we've got a position, we don't need to feather it with bullshit. We don't need to put into this despot who said one thing that you agree with once, and so you use him as an example because he agrees with your narrative. And I will say to Woof, who I've never been to Woof, but I'm very, very, very keen to get there. A huge congratulations for the 6,500 signatures, which is just here, that you got in the the whatever it's called,
the petition.
The
petition. And that's a huge effort for Dunedin to get
that's probably
that many people to sign a petition.
5% of the whole city, give or take. I mean, 125,000 people. And look, as a lot of people have said, Lee Vandervis, and they're talking about him, Lee Vandervis here, has come out against it, and he's a pretty regressive redneck, sort of an alt-right supporters, in my personal opinion. That's my honest held belief, if anyone wants to have a crack, and from what he says and what he does. But what I'll also say to the people who are supporting this is, I think you have the moral high ground. I think you are in the position to do it. I think you are right. So you don't need to then feather your argument by saying, needless to say, when the day comes that the colours meet the concrete, and we and our tens of thousands of allies in Otipoti will not be forgetting who supported us. It's a little bit threatening, but also we've got 6,500 signatures, which is amazing. We don't need to jump straight away to trying to allow other people to take down our argument by saying our tens of thousands of supporters. It's a messaging thing that I kind of go, you've already won. You've won the argument. You don't need to push harder and make it sound better, because it's already it stands on its own 2 feet, and we want it to happen. And I think it will.
I think the other side, that's a tactic that they use quite a lot, is just massively inflating their numbers. Like you had the anti-lockdown protests up in Auckland the other week, where Brian Tamaki was saying that they had 20,000 people turn out for that, when it was actually about 5,000.
Yeah.
It's still a horrific seen that with Trump's inauguration, it's the biggest inauguration ever. And then the photos were like, no, you can see through that. So yeah, I would probably acknowledge that, as sometimes it's hard when you're trying to build a movement, not to go, oh, there's a wee few more of us.
But you don't need to. Yeah, you don't need to. I had a friend of mine once, and look, I'm taking a tangent here on topic, but I'll give you the example. I had a person of mine who was very much they were pro-Israel, and they sent me a link, a whole bunch of people links, where they talked about how Hamas were marrying child brides, and they had these photos of these Hamas, or these men claiming that they claimed were in Hamas, and they had these children in wedding dresses. It took me 2 minutes to search the internet and find that the culture in that region, they dress the flower girls exactly the same as they dress the brides. Like, they have matching things. So it was complete bullshit. And I'm like, if your argument is good enough to stand on its own, you don't need to include the bullshit. You don't need to include the fake news. You just let the argument stand on its own 2 feet, because your argument wins. The Rainbow Crossing wins. It wins for people who want to support the community. It wins for looking good. It wins for brightening up an area. It wins for being a place that people will literally come to. That it could well turn into visitors to Dunedin. They go see all our wicked street art around the place, and they go walk across. They do an Abbey Road across the across the thing. You don't need to push bullshit when you've got the moral high ground. If you've got the moral high ground, bullshit should roll downhill, not up.
I certainly saw that when Wellington did theirs. I mean, Vandervis talks about PC virtue signaling. When I was in Wellington, they did a Rainbow Crossing, and they changed the pedestrian walk, don't walk figures to be Carmen, the famous drag queen.
Cool. Yeah.
And the emotive hyperbole arguments about those two things, it was wasteful, it would damage safety, what messages it's sending. You know what? They faded away in less than a month. Like it was just like, oh, I go across this crossing here, that's clearly marked with paint. When the green lady comes up, it's a green lady, away you go. Just while we were talking about that petition, they had 6,500. The other big petition that was circulating in Dunedin not too long ago is Brent Weatherall's petition to not change anything on George Street ever.
Is he the jeweler?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He got 6,000 on that petition as well. So I think you've got, there's like 12,500 people that we really want to put in the same room.
But it probably also speaks to how many more people go through Woof and get a drink than pop into the jewelers as well.
Absolutely.
And probably after you've had a couple of drinks on a Friday night, you probably find it very easy to sign that petition then, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
Look, I think the argument as well about finance and business and saving money and waste money is kind of bullshit as well. I know that the he who will not be named, old Voldemort, Lee Voldemort, talks about running the city more like a business, and I'm like, okay, so you want to shut the libraries down?
It doesn't work
because the
libraries aren't for government. That's a horrible argument.
You want to shut down we're going to shut down the stadium. We're going to shut down the libraries. Not a good business model.
He was against the stadium.
Nonsense. Yeah, I know.
Famously against the stadium,
and he lost out there, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean it's that small business ideology, small government ideology, that the local government's only job is to fill in potholes and check the parking meters and make sure the rubbish is picked up. That does not create a vibrant city. That creates miles of grey concrete and no art, no culture, no vibrancy.
Well, the other thing, and it's a bit like I talked earlier about, family first aligning themselves with Putin. It's so funny saying that out loud. Is that when the narrative fits, you'll swap your position. So, for example, Lee Vandervis, who's a Dunedin councillor that nobody around the country knows about, but think of your local council and their most alt-right member, that person,
or your drunkest, most racist uncle.
And my honest held opinion, and probably Chewy's as well, is if it was a business, if it was a proposal from the council granting money and helping businesses, he'd likely be all for it. Now, a business owner, which I am one of, but a business owner is not the majority of Dunedin. It's not all of Dunedin, which he talks about. So when the narrative works, these kinds of people typically are all in, even if it's contrary to an example from a narrative that doesn't work for them. So it's just all nonsense. It's bullshit. Hey, we should also stay on we come back to the rainbow connection, as Kermit once said, because I did want to say something about it as well. Obviously, excited to see it, fully supportive of it. I do think, though, that there is now a case to be had that if we're talking about inclusivity, and if we're deciding as a society, which is what we're talking about, when we put pen to paper and then when we all get behind this, what we're saying is we want representation in our community of these groups that have been treated poorly. So, in my opinion now, if we're going to do this, we need to keep doing it. So think about the groups in New Zealand, the marginalized minorities in New Zealand, that we want to see representation of within our community. And if we've decided that a way to do it is to give them a section of land that we're going to call a crossing and develop it that way for them, let's have something that the local iwi design and develop and we mark as a crossing. We hear stories about, the Chinese that came out to Otago all those years ago and did the gold mining. The Pacific Island communities in this place, the disabled communities. Let's actually now take this, because I kind of feel like if we're going to talk about inclusion, which we are with the LGBT plus crossing, the rainbow crossing, fully supportive. But if we don't go on and do it with others, it feels like activism versus inclusion. Now, I'm not saying it's activism. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying if we're going to talk about using this as an example for inclusion, let's start putting it out there to other marginalized minorities and actually turn it into a Dunedin thing, not just a one group thing, but a Dunedin thing.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that was one of Van der Vis's criticisms, is that it wasn't an original idea. Sure. But I really like what you're suggesting there, that there could be multiple crossings that are designed and representative. I mean, today's the anniversary of Parahaka.
Right.
So, and I mean, famously, a lot of the guys that were rounded up at that point ended up being down here working on the harbour roads and that sort of thing. We could commemorate that. As you said, the Chinese community, we've got different sort of refugee groups that have settled in Otago.
Totally.
I think we have had, I guess, a perception in Dunedin that it is very Scottish and it is very white. And I can say in the last 20 years, that's changed quite a bit. You know, when I first came down to study here, there wasn't talk of a local iwi, or I don't think there was much consideration outside of lip service at times, and that has improved.
But there's also no reason not to have a wicked crossing that's a fantastic Celtic thatch as well. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, as you're talking, I've just brought this up just for a bit of fun. But you know, there's our world famous octagon. I mean, look at all the areas we've got that we could have amazing crossings on, and you know, different things that we could have. Look, all these roads coming into the octagon and all these areas. And I'm not talking about, you know, like how a talkback caller would say the brown communities. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about included communities. So the early European settlers here.
Communities.
Totally. Let's do something with and for them. So I guess what I'm saying is thank you, Woof, for what you've done and getting this underway. For people who think it's not representative of the whole community, so let's now do some more that are representative of the whole community.
It would be great to get this, as they said, color on concrete, and then go, cool, what's next?
Yeah.
What's the next one? Let's keep the momentum going. And I think that's more than anything what I want for Dunedin is momentum.
Yeah.
It can be very conservative here at times, and I like to see that change. Sometimes it's spectacular, like the street art, and then we go, cool, well, we've got street art now, it's done. We've done the street art. It's like, no, keep doing it.
Yeah,
keep doing more. Build.
And you look at some of these designs for these rainbow crossings around the world, and they are street art. They're on the ground and we're walking on them, but they are street art. So let's take that theme of street art. Let's celebrate what Woof has initiated and got us to do. Let's get this one done. Let's set a template for how it's going to work. And then let's find a whole bunch of other communities, and we can have these amazing corners and crossings all around Dunedin, representing all these smaller groups within Dunedin who make up this big, beautiful city we live in. You know what I'm saying?
100%. Great idea.